Hey Gina, as we started discussing the topic for this episode, we kind of stumbled around a couple of topics, and this is one that I think is very important. It's a very important topic, which is gender gap and the gender gap that happens here in the U.S. And I want to just describe a little bit of our exchange for the folks listening. It was basically you giving a very passionate pitch for this particular topic, and myself thinking to myself, do I know enough about this issue? And then I said to myself, yeah, I'm an ally. I'm an ally of the movement. I'm an ally of, women. Why not? This is something that you can do. But what I found really interesting was as I started doing my homework, I wasn't as educated as I thought. And there was a lot of things that I was missing on. So I'd love to have a conversation with you today on gender gap in the United States.
I love the topic. One because it's very close to my heart, and I have been a big proponent and early riser of the feminist movement. And gender gap is one that always kind of humming in the background, and always, no matter what movement is in front of you, there is always still the movement of women and how we create gender equality in our communities. And it feels like we make progress but we don't. And just having a conversation, and while we were exploring the topic, it was interesting to see your response and how you felt that you knew and you were an ally, though when we got into the weeds it was just kind of like uncovering other things that I even felt that maybe was triggering some nervousness around the topic.
Oh, definitely some nervousness. So, just in the term gender gap itself, I just saw gender gap as men and women not being paid equally, or women not being paid as equally as men. That's just kind of the way I generalized gender gap. And then when I started looking at it, it's the disparity of opportunity, status, and attitudes between men and women. And I said to myself, wow, I had never looked at it from that perspective. I had only looked at it from a salary type of way, so it was really important to me as I learned more about this topic, how wide ranging these issues are.
And they're vastly. I mean, we're let me bring it back home to say the in the past few years we've made some progress, but I'll come back to what that progress is. When I was in university, there was the feminist movement was, we're talking about the 1990s, early 1990s.
Hmm.
And the feminist movement was still happening in Costa Rica, and I participated in many conversations and protests and fighting for our rights. Of course, we were kind of on the wave of what the feminist movement was here in the U.S., and so we were 10, 15 years behind, but we were still trying to create a value proposition of why women equality was important. Though when you're looking about, say, 50 years ago, that's when the feminist movement started as a movement. I mean, not that women have not done and created history over time, particularly in the advocacy of women. But the last 50 years, it feels like we made some progress, but we have more phones being released than women rights being updated. If you know what I mean. If
Yeah.
technology, if we were to advance the same way technology does, we would be in a completely different shape. But uh, some people just develop these awkward sentiment towards feminism, feeling like at the time were women who were main haters and was caught into the web of who is saying what and for what and for whose benefit. And it was this whole conversation of a woman's place is at home, and what if women enter the workforce, and who's going to watch the children. And so there were some patriarchal structural questions that we all came up with, and we have been trying to answer them over time, but we just haven't gotten there. And even though we have a new fashion of modern feminism, it still doesn't feel like we are where we need to be.
And to be honest with you, that stigma is real. I know that amongst some peers, some men, sometimes hearing the word feminist is like a bad word, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know where that I don't know if it's a media thing. I don't know if it's an agenda thing from somewhere, somehow. I don't know, but there are certain words that people now feel trigger. I recall when I think of feminism, to be honest with you, I start thinking of 20th century or 19th century of women wanting to fight for their rights, and ironically it was mostly middle and upper class white women in suffrage looking for political equality. That's kind of what they were looking for. So that's where I see like the start of what was feminism, and I think to myself, well, what's wrong with wanting to have rights? What's wrong with wanting the right to vote? I don't see how someone can make that as a bad thing.
Well, they will see it as a bad thing because rights are the equal of power. If you have rights, you have power. And someone very smart a long time told me, nobody gives power away. Nobody will give power away, and rights mean that. And for women particularly, if we don't know what we're looking for or what we're looking after, if we're not clear on our legislative agenda, it's very difficult for us to invite other people to be participants. And during those times in the 90s, it got lost in the smoke of what is it that you want again? Because we were questioning the entire infrastructure, and the revolution, it didn't happen. It happened in certain aspects, but not. I have seen it more as an evolution of gender equity than a revolution, because we are still today struggling to be able to maintain our place. And I still get upset with folks when they say you fight like a girl. To me, that's just the number one symptom and signal that we are way behind the ball.
Gina, I like where you're going with this conversation. And one thing I do want to mention, I do believe that the generation you're talking about, your generation, our generation, they kind of helped in defining the word feminist. Now, I'd want to take us back after this short break into a backwards portal to talk about the second wave of feminism, those in the 1960s, and we'll talk about that after this break.
LatinX Point of View is brought to you by Civic Canvas, a bilingual boutique firm designing strategies for social change. To learn more at civiccanvas.com.
So, Gina, we're back from our break. And as I mentioned before, thank you for helping me with the understanding of the 1990s and of your generation. But let's take a step backwards. Help me understand what led to where your generation was able to pick up that baton. So, what happened in the 1960s? What happened with those women, and what did they do to really spark a movement?
So modern feminism, it is something that actually Huffington Post has a whole website for women who are wanting to learn more. And from our conversation as interactions, I think we all need to kind of dive into what this modern feminism look like, and somewhat the social response to what feminist is. And I love what you say, that the word and the pushback and some of the negative connotations around feminism, because some of the modern women advocates will say feminism is the wrong word. We're talking about the gender gap, and we're talking about equality, and it's not about advocating for women, it's about advocating for equity. And so each is genderless, yet of course, in order for us to get there, we have to acknowledge the different barriers that exist in society that prevent women from advancing. And for the past, I want to say, for the past couple of years, I personally have seen from the times that I grew up, which was very dormant. We did not have a social platform to bring forward some of the things that we were concerned and we were working with. And I think for minorities, we feel empowered now through social media because we have outlets to be able to rally again around issues. And that is kind of giving us a new platform for us to springboard some of the things that we want to see changing in the world, that we want to see, and for you to declare kind of where are you in this value system of, from your own acknowledgement of, I am an ally, but I'm not sure I know enough about the impact the backseat of women in our society.
As you were mentioning the social platform, I started thinking of the Me Too movement and things like that. But then it got me to thinking, what was the original Me Too movement, or what was the original social platform? And from what I can recall, the 1960s of women wanting to fight for that right, the burning of the bras. So was the burning of the bras in the 1960s in fight for equality, was that the first step towards using regular media as a social platform for people to voice their opinions and to get feminism or to get equal rights for women in the 1960s?
Well, but I think for the 1960s, the different installments, I mean, women were fighting for the rights to their body,
Mm.
which was long denied in history. And reason why we say history and not her story. And some of us have adapted to talk about history, which is very difficult to say without the he, right? To say the stories that made up our humanity. But women were fighting for the control of their own body. They didn't want to shave. They didn't say, we don't want to wear bras. I have rights over who I have sex with. I have rights over who I want to have a child with. And at the time, it was imposed by society that you have no choices. Though women rebelled, I guess, and they said, no, we do. And that was kind of the springboard to awakening one of the, kind of the social register of how women should behave. Now, but that was how women should behave with their bodies and in society, but it wasn't saying more how women were going to really adjust to the changes that the workforce was going to bring, and what were the sacrifices and whatnot that women needed to take on.
I found that the second wave of what they call the second wave of feminism, it worked on combating those cultural and social inequalities that you were referring to. But one of the most interesting things that I think in the work that I was looking at was it also brought in women of color and women from other developing nations who were seeking solidarity in these issues. So it wasn't only a middle class white woman, upper class white woman issue like what we saw in the early 1900s, early 20th century, but we saw that this was kind of a more inclusive movement in that second wave.
It is an inclusive movement, and it has now still, I think there is some segregation within, because we know within women there is class and there is race, and who sits in the bigger seats, particular women that are not of color. And so that kind of tells you not only how we're dealing with our gender, but also how we're dealing with our race and how we perceive each other. Now, but to me, a big breaking point that tells us where we are is the Women's March back in 2016 or 17, when we had more than 200,000 women come to Washington, and generally there were about 6 million nationwide and worldwide, even more. Of women, awakening of women, and you pretty much say you pissed us off, you made us mad, and here we are again, and we are stronger, and we're smarter, and we have careers, and we have, and we're doing it all. Unfortunately, we're doing it all, and that came as a signal of we're alive, and the movement could be alive. And I love the fact that we are now having Women's March chapters, because we have to continue to educate ourselves.
Has the movement reopened the door on the discussion of gender gap in America?
When most people will think the gender gap is just about earnings, every woman right now in the United States is earning 70 to 98 cents per every dollar a man earns, while we continue to propel, and we're 50, we're half of the population in the United States, but we still don't get the acknowledgement of our hard work. When we see, for example, politicians are still having to make decisions about birth control, or we see that the health or cost of medical coverage is different between men and women, and they made some really bad arguments about why the difference in